Let's get to our conversation with Mark Regev, who's the senior advisor to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and he joins us now. Mr. Regev, thank you very much indeed for joining us on LBC this evening.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Rachel.
Well, I think this is our first time I've spoken to you. Obviously, I've been following you intently the past 2 months and listening to what you have to say about what Israel is having to do in response to October the 7th. In the last few days, we've seen efforts by the UN to have a ceasefire declared, but of course the US has vetoed it. Was Israel not remotely interested in a ceasefire? And under what conditions could you envisage a ceasefire being ever possible?
So, of course, we welcomed the US veto. At the United Nations, the deck is stacked against Israel. There's this automatic majority. And we don't often get resolutions that are all fair about Israel there.
I understand.
And so once again, we thank the United States for its diplomacy. And let me explain why the resolution was terrible. Because basically it was a lifesaver for Hamas, because we're coming in and we're in the process of taking Hamas apart, and we're having increasing success. We're seeing more and more Hamas fighters surrender. Their organization is starting to break up. And here comes the UN and says, stop, don't complete the job. And the problem with that is, if you leave Hamas in power, that's not peace. That's just a recipe for further violence, in 6 months or a year, because Hamas says openly that they don't believe in any sort of coexistence with Israel. They think my country should be destroyed. They think all the Jews here should be killed. Their words, their program. And so the idea of peace with Hamas is a misnomer. It's impossible. There will be peace once Hamas has been destroyed.
Are you suggesting that the UN under Antonio Guterres is actually assisting Hamas in its mission to destroy the state of Israel or eliminate it? I mean, and do you... Sorry, you know what I'm saying.
I know, I do.
I was just looking at I was looking at your bookshelf and seeing a Blair and a Brown book, and I slightly lost my thread. But yes.
If I look hard, I might even find a Johnson book. I don't know.
I'll keep looking, but I'm much more interested in what you have to say about the UN. And do you think it's actually doing Hamas's work for it?
Look, first of all, it's not just I and the government of Israel that have criticized the UN for having an obsession, an anti-Israel obsession. 2 previous Secretary Generals have publicly addressed the issue, Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan. The current Secretary General, instead of fighting the institutional bias in the organization, seems to embrace it, and that's a problem. And I don't know if he willingly is thinking about how he can help Hamas tomorrow. But the results of his action is, once again, to throw a lifesaver to Hamas. Why would you do that? Hamas is, as you said in the introductory remarks, they're guilty of the most brutal crimes against humanity when they attacked us on October 7th. And when they're gone, it'll be better not only for Israelis, for obvious reasons, it'll be better for Palestinians too. And the idea that you would give them a new life by forcing Israel to stop our campaign, it's just a mistake.
The US administration is under pressure to give a terminus for Israel's assault on Gaza. Can you put an end date on what you're doing in Gaza? Or is that, again, like a ceasefire, not possible when Hamas is holding over 100 of your people hostage, and it's not a trusted trader, it's a bad actor when it comes to doing any sort of deal with Israel?
Well, we, of course, very much fear for the people Hamas is still holding. And we fear not only because we saw the sort of violence that they were capable of committing on October 7th, the burning of people alive, the rapes and murders, the massacring of the young people at the music festival. But we got out, as you know, a week ago, we got out over 80 Israelis. Altogether, I think 105 people were released, Israelis plus the non-Israelis. And the stories we heard from the people in captivity were very distressing.
Well, given that you've mentioned the hostages, I mean, Qatar is warning that the window is narrowing over negotiating a further ceasefire for the release of further hostages. So what's your response to that?
So we were prepared to continue the previous understanding, which brought out the 105 people. But the trouble is Hamas weren't. They unilaterally, after accepting a list that was agreed to, they reneged on their commitment to release all the women and the children, and then they opened fire. So if there's fighting today in Gaza, it's because Hamas refused to continue to release hostages. Now, Hamas aren't going to release hostages. Let's be frank. We know who we're dealing with. They're not suddenly going to become humanitarians. They're not going to become Boy Scouts and good global citizens. That's not Hamas. They will release hostages if they are under amazing pressure to do so. And because Israel will only agree to cease a ceasefire, as we did in the past, for the release of hostages, that may be as an incentive for Hamas as we increase the pressure on them to do a future release of hostages. If not, we'll use military means to get our people out. I mean, our operation is twofold. One, of course, to destroy Hamas's military machine, and at the same time, we'll do everything we can to get our hostages out.
You've seen the mass demonstrations across the cities of the world, especially on the streets of London, pro-Palestinian marches, which are a reaction to what people are watching on their screens and the numbers that have been given by the Gazan Ministry of Health. I think the latest death toll is 17,000, half of which are women and children. What is the feeling in Israel about a sense of overkill in terms of the if you compared the death tolls of October the 7th and the 2 months since, and how can Israel continue to carry on at this rate of destruction without becoming an outlier, maybe supported only by the US and the UK that abstained, in the global community?
So if it was possible to dismantle Hamas's military machine by sending an email to the Secretary General of the United Nations or to the head of the European Union, I'd be in favor. I wouldn't have to risk my own soldiers in battle, and we wouldn't have any collateral damage in Gaza. It would be wonderful. But that's la la land. That's not serious. If we need to destroy Hamas's military machine and end their autocratic rule over Gaza, yes, we have to use force.
But sorry to interrupt, but isn't it also la la land to think that you can eradicate Hamas? Are you not, by bombing Gaza to oblivion, just recruiting a further generation of Hamas terrorists for the future to threaten the state of Israel?
So I've heard that, but I think most of us in Israel have a different perspective. And that is, when this is over and Hamas is defeated, and Gaza will desperately need humanitarian support and reconstruction, Hamas's path of extremism and violence and barbarism, the sort of brutality it's committed is really barbaric. That will be discredited, not because Gazans suddenly love Israelis. I've got no illusions. There are very strong and entrenched historical enmities. But they will see what Hamas has done to them. You know, when the German Chancellor was here, Schulz, he said Hamas are the new Nazis. And I think he's right in many ways. And just as when the Allies entered a destroyed Berlin, so maybe at the beginning the German people blamed the Allies, but ultimately they blamed Hitler for bringing all this upon them. And I think you could very well see something similar in Gaza, that people will see where the path that Hamas leads them only to a dead end.
I see. I mean, it's an interesting comparison. Germany has disowned almost completely its Nazi past and is a very peaceable country. It doesn't even have nuclear weapons. Can I lastly just get you to reflect on what Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, said? And I'm just quoting. He says, we're not going to have durable security for Israel unless and until Palestinian political aspirations are met. That's an acknowledgement that there has to be a political, negotiated, long-term solution to this conflict.
So, first of all, I accept that, and so do Israelis. But I think it's important to understand that Hamas, as long as they have power, as long as they are strong, they oppose any sort of Arab-Israeli reconciliation. I mean, Hamas, and they believe it, unfortunately, it's not just words. Hamas says that my country has no right to exist, not in any borders. Hamas says that every Israeli civilian, every Jew is a legitimate target for its terrorism. Hamas says that any Arab who signs a peace treaty with Israel is an enemy to the Arab cause and to Islam. This is all what they say, and they believe. And so when we defeat Hamas, we're not only doing ourselves a favor. We're going to be better protected without Hamas on our southern border. But isn't that also good for everyone who wants to see peace in the Middle East? Because when you destroy the most extreme and violent and barbaric enemy of peace, surely that creates room for more moderate and pragmatic voices to enter the vacuum?
Well, one would hope so. Mark Regev, thank you so much for your time this evening. I didn't see that the title that he referred to him. He is, of course, the senior advisor to the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I'll get back to your calls.